Hi, friends. Before I jump into this week's episode, I just want to give you a quick update. So many principals I'm talking to all over the nation, and I know there are Principal Matters listeners internationally are managing school from a distance. And so before I jump into this week's episode, which is part 3 of my conversation with Jen Schwanke about her new book, Reboot for Principals, and how you can be maintaining your own motivation as a lead learner, I want to share a quick conversation I had with Chris Legleiter, a principal in Kansas, who just gives an update on how his school is approaching distance learning. We recorded this over the weekend, so just a heads up on this conversation that maybe will inspire you in the work that you've been doing if you have a chance to even listen to this as busy as you've been. We actually recorded this on my phone app, so you're going to hear my volume is actually much lower than Chris's, so I apologize for any technical difficulties in hearing, but he's got some great feedback. But I appreciate you so much, and let me play this before I jump into the episode with Jen.
Well, I'm talking to Chris Legleiter, who is in Kansas. And Chris, remind us what school you're at, and you've chatted on Principal Matters before, but tell us where you are again. And I'd love to hear an update of what's been going on with your school, because Kansas is getting ready to start distance learning.
Yes, I'm at Leawood Middle School, and we're a middle school, grades 6 through 8 in suburban Kansas City. And the past week, our staff has been kind of preparing lessons for the virtual continuous online learning that we will start here on March 30th. This past week, I think the biggest thing that we focused on, besides teachers getting their lessons ready, was just most important. I think it always comes back to people. So we spent a lot of time through Zoom with our staff. I spent a lot of time calling teachers, texting teachers. Our district administrative team had a lot of Zoom meetings. So there was a high priority on connecting with people. And I sent out 2 videos to our families and our students just to really connect with them, because I felt like that is important thing I can do as a building leader, is just connect with our kids and our families. And they were for different purposes. The first one was all about connecting, and the second one was more helping them to understand what the learning plan is going to look like.
Wow. Thanks, Chris, for saying those things. I'd love to rewind a little bit. So when you found out that you guys were going to go to distance learning, I know Kansas has a good plan that you've been, that kind of gives a roadmap for like how to prepare. So you guys literally spent this last week prepping for this coming week when you're going to implement the distance learning. So what a great idea to send a video to your parents. It sounds like you did it twice. So talk a little bit about what was that format like? Were you doing YouTube? Were you doing Vimeo? How did you share that so that other principals might think about ways they can be connecting with their family?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we are fortunate as a district, our secondary schools, like our middle school, we've been using a learning management system called Canvas already. We're in, I think, year 3 of it now. So there's an easy feature in there where you can create a video and send it out as a link. So my first video is just through Canvas. And there's a way for a person like myself to send it to families, but also through Canvas, send it to your students. So I did that. But in the second video, my assistant principal and we did a Zoom lesson, and we recorded it. And so the second one we did through Zoom, and we recorded it and sent the link to our families. And that one was mainly like a Q&A. She was asking questions about their learning plan as a student, or maybe a family would be curious, and I answered it as a staff perspective. And our thought there was just to really make sure that people are informed as we get ready to start.
Wow. I love that. So here we are. We're in the weekend before the launch. And you're sitting in your house, and I'm sitting in my house. So how does it feel, man, to be a distance learning principal, because you're not physically with your people? And I know how much you love connections and relationships. So how are you handling that?
I'll be honest, that is the hardest thing, is that I think most educators, we are all about relationships. And it took me a few days to really understand the relationships are still there. And it's all about now understanding, how do I adjust to still connect with people? And so as the building leader, like I said, those videos was one way to connect. I spent some time yesterday calling a few of my families one-on-one on my phone just to connect. So I think it's all about still understanding, you could still write a note and mail it to someone's residence. So I think connecting relationships are still important, but I think that looks so different now in the virtual world. And that's what I'm trying to adjust to as a leader is focus on what I can do, not what I can't do.
Yeah. So Chris, you lead a middle school, and if you don't mind, I'd like to dig into the nitty gritty just a little bit on some of your learning plans, because as I've talked to Oklahoma principals and principals outside of my state across the U.S., it just sounds different to everyone. And I think that's because every community is different. But what's that going to look like for you guys, or at least, and I know when you jump into this, you immediately will run into like, well, this works and this doesn't work. But what's the initial plan for content delivery, and what's the focus for teachers?
Yeah, that's, I think, one of the questions our district leadership and the state department really wrestled with early on. And I got a big kudos or credit to our district leadership. They did a great job because they set our buildings and our families up, teachers up for success. Really what we're going to look at is doing, with middle schools at least, is a every other day block schedule. So now that's not what we currently run when we're in our brick and mortar building. But for the virtual world, we thought the best thing we can do for our kids and give them some type of a format, a structure, a routine, and at the same time give our teachers and students some flexibility within that, because everybody has different challenges. So basically, class periods like hours 1, 3, 5, and 7, and 9 meet on Mondays and Wednesdays. Tuesday and Thursdays are hours 2, 4, 6, 8. And what the State Department has told us is that kids cannot do more than 30 minutes of classroom work per class period per day. Mm-hmm. So the way we set it up, as an example, like second hour class may go from 9 to 10 o'clock. Well, the kids aren't going to be working from 9 to 10 o'clock, but within that hour, they should spend probably 20 to 30 minutes on an instructional activity. But there's also time in there for them to get away from their computer or the activity, take a mental break, physical break, and then come back in at 10 o'clock for the next class. And it's all set up through the learning system that we use, which is Canvas.
So were you able to, that sounds like a great plan, by the way. I like how you've broken it into blocks so that schedule seems a lot more doable. What are you doing about kids or families without technology? Or it sounds like the majority of your school is able to use technology.
Yeah, we were fortunate. We're already a one-to-one district at the secondary level. But I will tell you, before this all happened, we already had, if families told us they didn't have Wi-Fi at home, our district reached out to them and provided hotspots. So we were really without knowing it, we were prepared for this to an extent. Wow. But I think, we're still dealing with, we have Chromebooks, and we're still dealing maybe where a kid's Chromebook is at the building. They left it at the building when on spring break, we did not know this was going to happen, or their device is now broken, so we're still dealing with some of those little logistics, important things. And that's where we're telling people, just be patient, give grace, and that, we'll work out a plan and we'll work with you. The biggest thing we've told families in terms of content is that our teachers, what they spent this past week on was trying to pick out the most essential standards or skills that they can focus on. And basically, we have 8 to 9 weeks coming up of learning online. And if they're going to meet twice a week, they basically have 16 sessions of 30 minutes or a total of 8 hours. And so we told our teachers, if you saw your classes for 8 hours, how can you narrow down the skills to the most essential? And we're not really focused on grades. We're going to focus on how can we get kids engaged? How can they become connected through discussion boards, choice boards? How can we give feedback? Those are the things we're really focusing on with our teachers.
Yeah, that's great. And I was going to ask you that question on grades. Because I know that's a question, especially at the secondary level, and some of the high school people that I talk to are trying to figure out what that looks like. And I think the number one goal I'm hearing from people is whatever you do, the goal is to engage and make sure that none of the outcomes of this are punitive. This is not, so some schools are talking about trying to freeze grades where they are and give kids a chance who were behind to do work to raise those grades. Some schools I'm talking to, I hear people talk about completions, or what are some things you guys are thinking about when it comes to how to record that? Because I know in a few weeks you're going to be getting to the end and you're going to be like, okay, what do we put on their records? Have you had that conversation yet?
Yes, and I'll be honest, at a middle school, it looks much different than like a high school. So I'd have to go back into the plan for our high school folks, what they're doing. But I know school, what we're focusing on is, once again, getting the kids engaged in learning experiences where some of those skills they can be learning and working on. But as far as grades, what we've told our teachers and families, their third quarter grade is their fourth quarter grade, unless they demonstrate in this fourth quarter that they perform higher, then they can use that higher grade as their fourth quarter grade. So we're trying to not really focus on the grade, but if kids do demonstrate they're performing higher, then we will put that as their fourth quarter grade. Middle schools have a little more flexibility because it's not on like the high school transcript, which colleges look at. And what we've been telling our teachers, because I know they feel a lot of responsibility, a lot of burden to cover the standards, just because they care so much, is that their best as a teacher will be good enough. And throughout the country next fall, or whenever we return, everyone's going to be in the same boat. Everyone's going to have to change those lesson plans a little bit that they typically did in August or whatever to adjust, and we're all going to be in it together, so it's okay.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to take a move to a global perspective for a second, Chris, because you and I both talk a lot about leadership, and it's just so profound to think about the implications of a global pandemic. I mean, when I think about my own children, my kids who are, middle school through college, are, Gen Zs. And so they're, the point of history that kind of started their trajectory, it was 9/11. And I think so much about what's going on right now, how this will probably mark the next generation of kids. And we have really no idea, because we're in the middle of it, to know what that trajectory is going to look like. But so I'm just curious what thoughts you've been having as you look across, just personally, what things have you been thinking about as you've been cooped at home like I have, working virtually, and but also being like immobile, unable to like go anywhere but just around your own community.
Yeah, it's definitely been a time where, a lot of thoughts run through my head about like what you shared, like what will it look like? How will we function? I do think like schools and educators, we're going to come out of this better than ever, because we're going to become more flexible. We need to be, but also we're probably going to be more adaptable with online learning. Not that that's going to ever replace the brick and mortar face-to-face, but I think it will help us. And I just think that, like, as a leader, it's going to help me to remind myself it still comes back to people. And what our families and our teachers is, when this is all over, the most important thing is, I think, how we treat each other. So I think it's still back to those human relationships, human skills, but it is going to look and change schools probably for the better. It's going to impact that change process a little quicker.
Well, and you and I both love technology, but sometimes I hate technology. And so there's this love-hate relationship with a tool that can be used and abused. And so for me this last week, it's been really encouraging to think about the redemptive uses of technology, because I've seen people using it in so many ways that have been productive. That, think about if this had happened 10 years ago. Think of it, if this had happened 15 years ago, there's no way you and I would be doing this right now. We couldn't be Zooming a conversation through our iPhones that I'm recording at my breakfast table, while you just got back from a run. This just wouldn't have happened. And it's the same thing with our teachers. The fact that we can log in and have conversations with 50 or 100 or 300 people at a time is just profound. And so I think that we're at a time when this happened where we actually have capacity to help more people than we would have, and we're not going to reach every kid. I talked to a great principal, Don Parker, who's in Chicago, a couple of days ago, and he's got students who don't have access to technology, or maybe they don't even have a stable home environment, they're being raised by grandparents. So that's where I think principals have to really think about the community that they're serving, and how can we go through these next several weeks connecting, engaging, making sure people feel taken care of, and helping them have some learning in the process. But learning really is going to become secondary to making sure people that their safety and well-being are first. So I'm sure you guys are doing food services. What does that look like for your community?
Yeah, you brought up something that really, when we first got the news in Kansas that schools were closed brick and mortar for the rest of the year, I mean, we understood the why behind that decision. It was the right decision to be made. But then there were so many like, oh my goodness, how are students going to get food? How are we going to provide the counseling services that we were already doing? How are we going to provide some of the clothing that sometimes families picked up? And so I think schools, at the very least, society will be reminded just schools do so much more than teaching academics. That is important. It's a small portion of what many schools are now doing and facing. And just on social media, through the people I'm connected with, you've probably seen pictures how schools, like in our district, they are providing food for families throughout the week at certain locations. And I'm just really appreciative of the people behind the scenes that are doing that. And, sometimes not even just food, it's providing deodorant and some of those products, hygiene products that families need, that we're still finding ways to get it to them. I know yesterday in our, some districts, there are families who don't have Wi-Fi. They're providing at some basic minimum, like paper packets. So there's still some learning. And the bus company was actually delivering the packets to the people's front porch. So it's just amazing, I think, when behind the scenes, the work that school leaders are doing to do their very best for families. And I know the families are appreciative too. There's so many challenges I face today's age to support young people, that when this happens, it reminds the magnitude of the impact of what schools really do.
Yeah, that's so powerful. Well, Chris, thank you so much for sharing with principals updates from what's happening in your part of the country. I so appreciate leadership, and I'm looking forward to hearing how that first week goes. Thanks for doing what matters.
Principal Matters Podcast, episode 188. Hi, friends. This is Will Parker, host of Principal Matters, the School Leaders Podcast, where each week we bring you inspiring, innovative, and imaginative ideas for your own school leadership. This week, we're back with our co-host, Jen Schwanke, as we talk about Maintaining Balance, Part 2. Jen is the principal of Indian Run Elementary and the author of 2 books, You're the Principal Now What, and The Principal Reboot, 8 Ways to Revitalize Your School Leadership, which just came out this month. Jen, congratulations on your new book.
Thank you so much. It's a labor of love, but it's nice to actually hold a copy, that's for sure.
Well, I want to encourage you, Principal Matters listeners, to go online today. And if you haven't already picked up Jen's book, Jen, where can they find your book?
They can find it at ASCD, which is the publisher of the book, and also, of course, on Amazon.
Awesome. Well, this week, we are going to be talking more about some of the principles that you share in your book, how to revitalize your school leadership. And last week, we talked a lot about reconnecting with our why, trying to maintain balance in our leadership. And we wanted to continue that conversation because, Jen, I think it's so important that in our work that we connect outside of our work, things that will help us stay motivated in our work. And so I wanted you to start today's conversation with your own story of what are some ways that you've been discovering how your outside experiences influence your own work.
Right. This is a topic you and I have talked extensively about, Will, and I speak to principals about balance as well, but it's a very fine line between becoming a lecture. You go to your doctor and he tells you, well, you need to eat better and you need to sleep better and you need to lose some weight or whatever. And you walk away feeling lousy, right? And that's not what you and I want this to be. We want this to more feel like empowerment or show you that it can be done in your own way. So I think the suggestions we're throwing out today, it's important to note, we're not saying do this. We're saying do your version of this, whatever that looks like. My story about this is I was so lucky to grow up how I did. We had zero money. My parents were they were living in poverty on a farm, just doing the best they could, but I had horses. And that's because we had land and we had pasture. And I lived a free, wild, delicious childhood on the back of my Arabian mare Belle. And so I started to tell my daughter these stories and she would just get cross-eyed with desire to have a horse. Well, we don't live in a situation where that can happen, I thought. Well, long story short, we ended up after some time with horseback riding lessons, we did lease her a horse this winter. And you want to talk about balance. That was something saying that I have really grown living this experience, not just with her, but having to go out in the cold and crack ice off the water buckets and bring that animal in out of the cold and saddle her up and ride her and help my daughter learn to ride. And so that's a story about balance that kind of came way back from my childhood. I bring it up because I think things that we loved as a child are still there in us. And so if you're feeling as a principal like you're adulting a little too much, you've grown up so much, you're carrying so much responsibility, you have control of nothing, responsible for so much, I think it might help to think of what did you love as a child? What made you just fly with happiness and dreams and excitement? Because that might be a way to start. Get back to who you were when you were feeling really good about the world.
Jen, that's bringing back a memory I think I've shared with you before, but I'm just going to share this with Principal Matters listeners again, if you've not heard it, or maybe it's been a while, but I'm having this memory of sitting in my living room. I grew up out in the country too, so we didn't have a lot of, stuff, but I remember having a big cardboard box that had somehow been delivered to the house, or my mom or dad had brought in from town, and cutting out the front of that box and turning it into a television set and getting inside of it and making my own TV shows. And then when I discovered a tape recorder, what those were? I would turn on that tape recorder and record my own radio shows where I was the weatherman and the news guy, and I would do commercials and jingles and sing songs. And so I would make my own radio shows. And who would have guessed?
Look at you now.
Guessed that we're 189 episodes
right.
into this podcast, and now I get to play with recording stuff, and I get to share stories, and I get to host a show. And so I want to just park there for a second, Principal Matters listeners. And I know you're probably, if maybe you're new to the show and you're thinking, what the heck does this have to do with school leadership? It has a lot to do, because Jen and I have been talking for several series about ways that you can stay inspired in your own work so that you can inspire others. And one of the ways that you can stay inspired is by connecting outside of your work with those things that bring you joy. So just park there for a minute. What are some things that you've always loved to do? And are you taking time to do them? Jen, for me, that's playing the piano, playing the guitar, writing music. Those are things I've done since I was a child. And I try to find ways to stay connected with that.
Well, and I think it takes some imagination, and it takes getting over that initial block of, oh, well, I can't do that now. I'm too busy, or I don't live in the right situation, whatever. But it's not necessarily the activity, but it's the person that you are or that you used to be. So as an example, I live in the suburbs now. I have no business having a horse, but there's a barn about 10 miles out that the situation worked. And so another example is I have a friend who used to just love to cook and bake, and she would make up these incredibly ridiculous recipes. And now what that manifests itself to her is she gives herself a half-hour cooking show every day. She doesn't really have the time, or quite frankly, the energy to be her own home chef, but she can turn off the noise for a little bit inside her own head and just tune into the Food Network, have a cup of raspberry tea, and just be in that place that made her happy. So I don't think that we're saying, hey, recreate your childhood. We're saying find that little twinge of fun from when you were little and bring that back into your life.
Yeah, Jen, just a couple of weeks ago, I was watching on NAESP. They have a great video podcast, so listeners check it out. And the hosts were interviewing a guy named Scott Hine, who's a principal at Lakeview Elementary in Yukon, Oklahoma. And Scott has been leading that school for a long, long time, but he's a storm chaser. So his passion is helping during severe weather to be a storm chaser and to report back to the news stations what's going on. And so can you imagine how that informs his work as a leader, and how much his kids must love to hear him talk about that?
Right. My husband and I have this joke. We say, boy, people get into all kinds of stuff, don't they? And there's a list actually in the new book of things that people that I know do to help balance their principal work. One of the funniest one is anybody who knows anything about Ohio knows that Ohio State football is a thing. And he goes and bartends on home Saturday football games. And he thinks it's a hoot. He has a great time. He makes a little bit of extra money, but that's kind of beside the point. It just immerses him in an environment that brings him a little bit of joy and happiness. There's also, photography, dancing, yoga, music, local theater. Many, many communities have really strong local theater organizations that can use not only actors, but set designers and so on. Travel, writing, ministry, DJ work, volunteering, fitness. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Travel agent for your friends. I have another friend who she says, I love putting together itineraries for people. I know some people who are, they have a little bit of dabbling in as stylists, helping friends develop workspace or home space areas. So all of those things might be just something that helps you balance your work of IEP, special ed, and discipline.
Yeah. So my wife loves all kinds of interesting things, but one of the passions that she's had this past year is making her own kombucha. And so who would have ever thought, so we've got these big jars sitting in our kitchen, but she finds so much joy in creating new flavors. And my son's now into it. I'm sitting here with a kombucha bottle at my desk because she loves to buy kombucha and compare it to her own. And it's just so much fun. You're right. Those things that we can do that stimulate the creativity and the love for life that we have, man, when you walk into school and you've actually reconnected with those things that you love about life, it gives you a little more swagger in your walk. It gives you a little more pep in your day. I just think it reconnects you with, and it also just reconnects you with the whys that are happening in the people you're serving.
Right. And I want to make two quick points. The first is I have a tendency to obsess. I think many principals do. So if I have something like, let's say, a really, really troublesome IEP coming up on Monday morning, I have the tendency to obsess and worry about that Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And so if I have something else that completely takes me away, guess what? When I walk in Monday morning for that tough meeting, I'm so fresh. My brain has not exhausted all the potential pitfalls of this meeting, and I've not ruined it already before it happened. And I'm much better as the leader and facilitator. And the other point I want to make very briefly too is when I hear things like we're presenting to your listeners now, I tend to get overwhelmed because I think I can't do all that. I can't make kombucha. I can't get a horse. There's no time. So what I want to encourage your listeners to do is pick one. Just pick something that speaks to you. Don't think this is Will and Jen saying, okay, do all these things. No. Your thing might be going to bed a half an hour earlier. That might be your thing. But just pick one thing that will make you feel healthier and a little bit smug, maybe, like you've got it figured out. A little bit proud of yourself. Pick one thing. That's it.
I love that. And so, Jim, when we're talking about the power of balance in our leadership, and it's so funny what the dichotomy I feel when we talk about balance, because I almost always feel this level of like new stress, like, oh, I need to be doing more. So I love it that you're just saying pick one thing. But I also think it's important to remember that actually what we're inviting you to do is to liberate yourself.
Yes.
To find a part of your day where you can just enjoy life, where you're not doing something because you have to, but you're doing something because you want to, because it brings you joy. So I think it's important to pick that thing that resonates with your heart. So, maybe that's painting, or maybe that's holding the hands with the person that you love every day for 30 minutes, or maybe that's snuggling with a child and reading that book that just brings you so much joy. But there's something that brings joy to your heart.
Right.
And you know that better than anybody else. And so reconnecting with that, I think, is an important part.
I really, really struggle in February. I've always struggled in February. I go to dark places. And my husband always says, this is where we need to pick one thing to look forward to every day. And here's the truth, Will. Sometimes it's simply my piece of toast. It's that's it. That's all I can look forward to. But it's a thing. It's a thing that every single day you wake up and you think, well, I at least have that. And that helps me get through the dark, dark, cold days of February. Yeah. And that really speaks to the other thing we wanted to talk about, Will, which was health. Taking care of yourself. School cafeterias are infamous for sucking the life right out of your soul. So eating right, packing a good lunch, sleeping, walking, like you said, with somebody that can help you enjoy a bit of your day, stepping away from those emails and texts for a little bit. Those are all ways to help you stay healthy.
They are. And, at the risk of sounding like your grandmothers, let's stay there for a little bit, because Jen, it's such an important self-care in the way that we take care of our health is such an important part of the balance that we have in the way that we lead others. And there's all, we can quote the medical science about how well-being, physical well-being plays such an important part in your mental well-being, but it all goes hand in hand. And I've talked about this before in my own practice, but for me as a school principal, and now that I do this work as a principal, director and consultant, for me, I had to find a rhythm of exercise that I could still have the time to do, but that would be something I would enjoy. And so that's going to look different for everybody. But for me, that was running. And so, I can put on a pair of running shoes and step outside in where I live. And most of the time, even in cold weather here, it doesn't snow a lot. So I can usually complete a 30-minute workout or 40-minute workout pretty quickly just around my house. And I can't tell you the number of times that I have been able to decompress from stress, just ruminate on something that maybe I'm trying to solve at work, process a conversation I've had in a relationship, come up with a new creative idea that I'd never considered before. And this year I've added the joy. We have a new dog at our house. I've added the joy of running with the dog. And so her name is Ivy, and she's part husky. And so Ivy gets to clip onto my arm by the leash, and we just run together. And so now I have this added joy of connecting with her in the mornings. And so I can't tell you how much emotional deposit that creates in me for the rest of the day.
Right. Those daggone dogs, they get us out even when it's cold, don't they? Oh, we got a pup too. And boy, keeping her from chewing up all the shoes takes a long run in the morning. That's for sure. That's
so Jen, I want to just put you on the spot for a second and ask you for some of your practices. And by the way, neither of us does these things perfectly, but everybody has their own systems, their own practices for self-care. What are some of the things that you do that keep you active?
Well, I've always been a runner, and then I gave it up a few years ago when I got really into hot yoga. And I'm going to tell you why I love hot yoga. It's because it's 60 minutes where somebody else tells me what to do. It's the best. So I sweat it out. I get all the toxins out. And so I do a lot of hot yoga. And then, like I said, we got a dog, and she was chewing up every single shoe in the house. So I decided I would just wear her out. And so every morning I take her on a little bit of a run too. So those are things that help me stay healthy. I really value that because I'm someone that if I don't feel good, then everyone else pays for that. Yeah. I need to feel good. And so there are many days that I think I don't want to, but I do force it because it makes me much more of a clear thinker, and it makes me have the endurance to get through the day. Last night we had an event at school. I got home at 9:30, and I had been on my feet in heels from 7:30 a.m. till about 9:30 p.m. And I was wiped, but it was something I could absolutely do. And, there was a little bit of pride in that I outworked everyone today, and I deserve a good night's sleep as a result.
Yeah, that's so important. And, healthy practices beget other healthy practices too. And again, I know we sound like grandparents here, but it also affects the way you eat. And so, when I'm staying active and I'm taking care of myself, then when I look at that piece of cake or I look at that fruit, I'm a little more motivated to think, man, I just worked hard to keep those calories burning. And I'm not sure I want to destroy what I just did by intaking all this stuff that's going to make me feel worse than I did before. So maybe I'm going to grab a couple of pieces of fruit here, and I'm going to think about my nutrition because that's going to affect the outcomes too. And Jen, I'm in my 50s now. So this last week I, did my annual physical, and when you get your heart checked and they look at your calcium levels, it's also important to think about what kind of life do you want 20 years from now? What kind of experience do you have? And I have 4 children, 2 in college, 1 in high school, and my youngest is in middle school. And it just touched my heart. Last year we were doing some hiking together, and he said to me, "Dad, you know what? I appreciate it's. I can't believe a middle school kid said this, but he did. He said, Dad, I appreciate it that you and Mom stay active because I like having healthy parents."
Yeah.
Because he liked the fact that we could go with him. That we could do things like that. We could go out and hike together and be able to be involved with him in the things that he loves to do.
Right. And it makes the younger people proud of us. I think that's really true. Go ahead, Will.
No, I was going to say, I think this might be an important time to talk a little bit about, with all of these suggestions and reminders of giving ourselves some grace, not beating yourself up when you don't do things perfectly. So talk about that for just a minute, Jen, because that's an important part of balance too.
Well, we all have that in us. Your Principal Matters listeners are all probably their harshest critics. And so when we misstep, we tend to just, oh, why did I do that? Why didn't I do something else? And so, the thing we need to model for others and also to keep ourselves healthy is just give yourself a break, for crying out loud. There's enough critics in your world. Don't let yourself be another one.
Yeah. So I think it's so important that when you are looking at those balances, those practices, that if you make a mistake, then you just move on.
Exactly.
Do the things that you know are good for you, and also realize there's seasons.
Exactly.
So you might be listening to this at a season in your school where you've got a little more freedom than you did a month ago, or you may be listening to this at a season in your school where you have no freedom because you're just so overwhelmed with tasks that it's really hard to even think about like eating lunch today.
Right.
So give yourself grace. Realize that there are some seasons where you can do more and other seasons where you can't. So like, for instance, I can remember in busy seasons in the school semester where maybe my 3 miles was just a mile and a half.
Right.
Or maybe it was just a quick walk around the neighborhood, because that may have been all of the time I had, but I'm going to give myself some grace. Or maybe I didn't get to run that morning. And so instead of beating myself up about it, I just went, you know what? I didn't get to do that this morning.
Exactly.
Tomorrow morning I will. And so I think that's important, an important part of encouraging yourself in those practices.
Exactly. I'm thinking about your mention of slow times. You know what I do every year over holiday break? In my district, we work a few days over holiday break, and that's a time that I really clean out my office. I purge all those things that have just been sitting there making me feel bad about myself, the stacks of papers that I need to look at. And I literally pull up one of those industrial sized trash cans and I just throw things in it, things that I haven't used or looked at for forever, to get rid of that clutter and to get rid of the responsibility that carries. And I'm going to do a little shout out too for the workspace. I think an office that you spend time in needs to be lovely. And so soft colors, some pictures of people you love, books that have spoken to you, flowers, maybe a bowl of candy, whatever it is that makes your workplace lead you to better health. We spend a lot of time in our offices and they need to be filled with positive energy. And so I do spend time on that. And a couple times a year, I get rid of things and I feel so much better and lighter afterward.
Yeah, I don't know if I've ever told this story. And so I want to make sure I couch it in a way that doesn't sound like I was a weird boss. But when I was at my old school, we were going to have a group was coming in to do some interviews and they wanted to use my office for some camera work. Well, Jen, I'm just not a natural decorator. I'm, so my office, was just very functional. But my secretary at that time, she is a great decorator.
There you go.
Her office always looks so cool, and she always had so many neat things on the wall. And so she said to me, "Will, would you like me? Would you like me to give your office some attention before they come in to do this?" And I was like, "Would you please?" And so now, the cool thing is she loved it. So she actually took a part of a day and really just started taking all the things off my bookshelves, putting them back up in ways that were designed pretty, adding some things to the walls and the cabinets and the desk. And just, she made my office look so much better and so welcoming for that event. And from that point on, I couldn't believe how much more I enjoyed working in that room.
Exactly.
And so maybe you're listening to Jen and me and you're like, I don't have, and guys, you may be thinking like I don't have any way of making my office like more lovely. Well, maybe you need to ask for help, because I have a superintendent friend who his wife comes and decorates his office. She makes sure that it's a place where he would want to be. It's very family centered, lots of pictures of their family together, but she makes his office look beautiful. And so maybe you're not skilled in that, so you can ask someone to help you.
Well, that's the point right there, is you don't have to be good at that to make a positive working environment. And many of our colleagues, they've got a cinder block office and they're thinking, how can I take a concrete floor and 4 cinder block walls and make it lovely? I can't help you with that, but I guarantee you there's someone in your building who can help to make it lovely. So do that, because when you walk in there at dark 30 in the morning, you need it to really look like a place you can spend the day.
Sure. And, I've talked to lots of principals too, especially assistant principals, who realize that their work, because they get bogged down with lots of student meetings, sometimes they need to take their work outside their office. And so I have a friend who actually has a mobile office cart. So he puts his stuff on on a cart that has wheels, and he'll push it through the building so he can go to places he loves in his building and just stand there and work.
Right.
Or call kids to that part of the school to meet with him. And so sometimes that workspace can be your office, but sometimes it can be moving to another location so that you're in the places that you want to be, where you're serving others too. So that's great feedback, Jen.
Right. Good.
Let's talk a little bit about, other things that we may need to be updating besides our offices so that we are staying inspired in the work that we're doing.
Well, I have two I'll throw out there very quickly. You know what I do when I'm feeling down is I pull up my resume and I update it. Not because I'm job hunting, but just for fun. And so many times I think, oh my goodness, I have forgotten all the things I've done in this past year. So every year or two, I pull it out, dust it off, and just add some things, take away some things that now don't feel as important to me anymore as I build the profile of myself as a professional. So that's a good tip. And then you and I have spoken extensively about relationships with others, but sometimes those need a little dust off too. We all have what I call the Eeyores in our building, and sometimes I find it best to avoid those people, but that's not good for anyone. So I will update and brush off those relationships, check in and say, okay, how are you? Even the people that are the grumpiest and make me feel tired, I try to find some value in those. My husband, again, has a great phrase. He says, as we get older and as we get busier, we have to seek the value in every relationship and every decision we make. And so there is value in all the people we work with, and we can go and dig that out and find it and feel a little bit better about our work.
Yeah. And so, Jen, I want to come back to that conversation about updating your resume and that comment about what value does this bring, because I talk to a lot of leaders who battle what I've been hearing others call an imposter syndrome.
Yes.
Where they start feeling this overwhelming sense of maybe I'm the wrong person for this.
Yes, somebody made a mistake. Somebody really messed up. I
cannot be the person that's qualified to accomplish this goal that's in front of me. And I think there's two answers to that statement. The first is that if you think you're going to do it alone, you're right. You need other people to help you do anything that you're going to do. No person alone has the capacity to accomplish all these things. But then on the flip side of that, the second part of that question is you're way more valuable, I think, than you often realize. And so, Principal Bachelorist, I'm speaking straight to you right now, because sometimes I think you forget the value that you bring to the situations that you're in. When you look back at your past, the experiences that you had as a student and then as a teacher and then as a leader, there are so many things in your past experiences, in your resume, as Jen said, that point to the value that you've been able to build and create in your experience. And you can't, nobody can steal that from you. Right. Those experiences are things that no one else can take back from you. And so no matter how difficult the situation is that you're facing right now, or that you're going to face next week or 6 weeks from now or next year, nobody can take away from you the experiences that you've had that have brought you to this moment, that give you perspective on what you're going to be doing next. And so sometimes I think it's so important, Jen, just to take a break, just to take a step back and rehearse those successes from the past.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Rehearse those things and remember that, heck, I do have a degree in this and I have accomplished these things before and I did solve these problems before in the past. Or Jen, like in our case, sometimes I think even for those of us who do a lot of writing, content creation, believe it or not, for those of you that don't do this work, it can be lonely work because you're spending a lot of time with your own thoughts and own content and words on a page. And sometimes you don't get the reflections from other people of what they even know or think about that content until years later or months later.
Yes.
Yeah. And so sometimes I think it's important for those of us that are like content creators, or maybe you're doing work that no one else sees, to just remember that there's value in that too, because there's stories that you are experiencing that if you're bold to share them out with others, they're going to find value in that too. So I don't know if I'm hitting the point on that, Jen, but I just think that's such an important reminder for people to battle that imposter syndrome.
Exactly. It's a real thing for principals. And I think it's because we spend a lot of our time doing work that really depletes us, whether it's standing in a middle school cafeteria while they tell you not to throw chicken tenders at one another, or whether it's listening to a parent, just scream at you things that aren't true and aren't fair and aren't reasonable and logical. Because we're paid to do those things, a lot of times we think, how in the world did I get here? Somebody must have made a grave mistake. But to sit down and write it down, whether it's on a resume template or even on a notebook, say, what have I done in the last year? What have I led? Where have I made a difference? And you usually walk away from that thinking, well, I'll be darned. I am legit. I belong here. So that's a good way to battle that imposter syndrome and fight through to believe in yourself a little bit more.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, let's wrap up the conversation today with, I just want to, before we leave, I just want to remind leaders that when they are in the process of growth, when they're thinking about how to maintain that balance, I think it's so important to realize that there is a cycle that happens within our leadership of reflection. And Jen, there's a great resource by an author named Pete Hall. He's another ASCD author like you, and he writes about the continuum of reflection and the importance of realizing that all of us start off first in a stage of unawareness. We don't know what we don't know, but we begin to, through experience, learn those things, and then which leads us to the conscious stage where we suddenly connect with learning in a way that we've never connected before, which leads to new actions. So we do things based on the knowledge that we now have, which should lead, and this is where a lot of leaders stop, it should lead to refinement, where we stop and we reflect on, what did I just learn from that so that I can grow from it? And then that cycle starts all over again. And so I think it's important, as you're listening to this conversation today, Principal Matters listeners, that you realize that we never, ever figure all this out.
Right.
This is something that we never, ever figure all this out on our own, that we're constantly in that cycle of reflection where we're going from unaware to aware to new action to reflection to refinement. And then it starts all over again.
All over again.
That's
right.
the joy of being a person, is that we're always growing, we're always learning, and we're always reflecting. Any other thoughts on that, Jen, before we wrap up?
No, I think that's a lot to chew on. I think our Principal Matters listeners can take that one and chew on it for a while and come out of it a little bit better.
Well, Principal Matters listeners, thank you so much for this week's listen, because as you think about your own balance, whether that's the things that you're reconnecting with that you loved as a child, or your own health practices, or how to maintain good relationships, or rediscovering the value and the work and the worth of what you do. You're never going to do it perfectly, but I'm so thankful for school leaders who are out there reflecting with us, Jen, because they're going to be stepping out today to influence the lives of teachers and students and make a difference in their school communities. So until next time, Principal Matters listeners, thanks for doing what matters.
Thanks, everyone. We hope you have a great week.
If you'd like other free resources like this one, you can check out all my posts at williamdparker.com.